Like many of you already know, horror has been doing relatively well in theaters lately, with films like Iron Lung, Backrooms, and Send Help all being extremely successful this year. And these films haven't just been successful financially, but have been successful critically as well, and have been some of the biggest films of the entire year. However, one film has been talked about more than all of the rest as of recently, and that of course would be the theatrical debut of Curry Barker, Obsession. I heard from many that the film would absolutely blow my mind with just how good it was, and after seeing it, I have no doubts in my mind about why it's been talked about as much, as there's just so much going on here that it makes it stand out extremely well. It truly is one of the rare films out there that I have truly seen to live up to the hype. From the acting to the cinematography to the dynamics, nearly everything about the film wholeheartedly works. But before getting further into this video, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe to the channel. I cover anything horror related, so if that sounds like your wheelhouse, make sure to check out the rest of the channel after this video. Also, since this film is now officially available for release, the review will have spoilers, so only stay here if you have seen the film already or don't care about spoilers. Thanks for listening, and now let's continue. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of Obsession was just how scary the film actually was. You don't hear me call something scary that often, but this film at multiple sections had me squirming in my seat with just how uncomfortable it made me. And I think it's because of just how well Curry Barker weaponizes every single aspect of the film against you throughout. First off, the pacing of the film itself is breakneck, with none of the film holding back whatsoever. The film is a roller coaster of emotions, as the first 20 minutes of the film act as the lift hill, and after it begins going down, it never really stops till the very end. So you never really get any amount of brevity throughout, as it's just one horrific situation Bear gets himself into after the other, with each one being more uncomfortable than the last. And while there are some standout scenes, with the party and bedside staring scenes being by far the most frightening, none of the scenes ever really overpower the rest of the film. One of the issues that a lot of the other horror films I've seen run into is that they'll have one really good scare and none of the other ones really live up to that scare. But Obsession never really does that, instead each scare being just as effective as the last one before it. And it's even more impressive considering the fact that there is hardly any jump scares at the film at all, instead focusing more on atmosphere, behavioral, and uncanny valley scares to unsettle the viewer. However, these scares hit you much harder as they are so quick and visually focused that your brain will notice it subconsciously sometimes before you even realize what is truly off. I felt this most in the bedtime scenes, as I didn't realize that she was wearing uncanny makeup in the scene until I saw the behind the scenes afterward. Instead, I just could tell that something was slightly off, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And that's what makes a lot of the scares in the film so powerful, because there's just so many layers to each scare that at least one aspect of it will make you unnerved in some sort of way. The scares are also really atmospherically focused, with the sound design largely working in favor of the scares themselves, to the point where you can literally tell when something bad was about to happen just by the sound design alone. This is because one of the main players behind what makes this film work is the edit of the film itself. It's rare for me to say that none of the film felt like it needed to be cut, but Obsession is one of those few films. Every scene pushes the story forward to the next frightening turn, and it makes the breakneck pace that the film goes for never really falter. Instead, the edits help pace out the scares in a way that feels natural, and while still adding a sense of surprise by just how they decided what to show and not to show. One scene in particular that shows the power of the edit in this film has got to be the party scene, as they could have easily had a bunch of cuts, as it was rather intense and dramatic. However, the film instead chooses to take it slow, allowing the suspense and tension to draw the scene out and really let it breathe. And that's really what is one of the most impressive parts of the film, as the film has a ton of room to breathe throughout, which is really impressive, as the film doesn't ever feel like too much but keeps such a fast pace. Then there's the cinematography, which is just so impressive for the budget it was made on. Although the budget does show on some occasions, every shot looks expertly composed, with them giving enough space for the actors to do their thing while also giving the film a distinct sense of style throughout. One thing you may notice is the lack of moving camera shots within the film, as nearly every shot of the film is completely still. And this is definitely due to the lack of the budget that the film has. It gives the film an almost observant type of perspective, as it feels like there's something that we are watching happen rather than something we are truly within. Some may see this as an issue, as they may think it keeps them from being fully immersed within the world of the film, but I argue that it gives a much needed matter-of-factness darkness to the film and keeps it actually scary. For example, while we see the characters' backgrounds and their motivations, which are heavily important to the film, as a whole, it feels like watching almost a car accident, as nearly everything bad that could happen just does. It feels like this is something that is just happening, especially with how unexplained the One Wish Below is. And it feels like no matter what these characters do, they are completely doomed. And that effect comes into full effect through the writing, because the characters are really well put together and extremely relatable throughout. This ties with the film's main themes, which is codependence, male entitlement, and predestined love, as the characters are going through something many people have went through or have witnessed at one point or another. I know that while within the film it takes it to extremes, many of us have seen behaviors similar to what Nikki and Bear display in our own daily lives, and seeing that behavior put on screen is quite hard to watch on some occasions. This gives the otherwise fantastical plot a degree of realism that makes all the scares that much more hitting, as it feels like real people trapped within a twisted fantasy. Speaking of the writing, the way this film constantly ups itself every scene makes the film feel like it's looming towards something bigger and bigger, as each meltdown within the film is bigger than the last. The movie does a great job of going for a frog boiling in water approach, as you don't realize just how bad it's going to be until, I would say, the party scene, for example. While the staring she does within the story is rather weird, it can be just somewhat explained as her just being overly excited. However, her behaviors by the party scene become noticeably violent, and thus ups the threat to a noticeable hold and stays there for the remainder of the runtime. And how it's able to hold that tension is just absolutely fascinating to watch, as even in the scenes without Nikki, you still feel like she could pop up at any moment. It almost builds a paranoia within you, just like Bear is going through himself, looking for Nikki somewhere in the background. This leads into something that the film does extremely well, which is giving the feeling of what a toxic relationship really feels like when you are trapped within one. You truly feel for both sides of the film, as both characters make decisions that we've all seen people make at one point in our lives. While Bear is most certainly the perpetrator and Nikki is the victim in the situation, the whole relationship screams a love that shouldn't be. And you can feel that within the dialogue, as none of the ways that Nikki talks about how she likes Bear go beyond a superficial level, as she doesn't really like him but is controlled by the codependence and obsession. There is no real chemistry between them, instead it's just all superficial. The film also grounded the fantastical elements within it pretty well, as a couple scenes were truly supernatural feeling, and they were by far some of the best scares within the film. The one that really stuck with me, and I'm sure with many of you guys as well, was one of the bedroom scene where she's in the corner, as I've talked about 100 times at this point. The scene is just so intense, as well things have been weird up to that point. I feel this is the moment where things fully escalate. Speaking of the escalation within the film, it's great as it gets you right into it and just keeps shrinking it up from there. As soon as Bear snaps the One Wish Willow, the film is just non-stop intensity, with each scene getting more disturbed than the next. I can't emphasize enough just how good the pacing of this film is. I know I've talked about it a lot, but the pacing of this film is just fantastic. This gives the film an extreme sense of dread, as you don't know just how it's going to escalate, but you know that based off of what you saw before, it's going to get so much worse. And honestly, this is just one of those films that I could talk about for hours, as there's just so much going on here in its themes and ideas. For example, the discussion around codependence as well as the manosphere gives the film a brutal edge to it that feels nail-biting. The cinematography is also great, focusing a lot on really long still shots that you could tell were rehearsed like crazy. The standout cinematography wise was by far the party sequence, and once again that scene is just so beautifully shot in a way that contrasts wonderfully with the horrific things that are happening on screen. Nearly every aspect of the film just works, and is by far my favorite horror film of 26 so far, and it's not even close, which is actually somewhat shocking considering just how good this year has been so far for horror. But with all that being said, when giving it a score, I find it pretty easy to choose, as there's just so much of the film that works. You may have noticed that I spent the entirety of this film just gushing over the film without pointing out any flaws within it. And while there is some flaws within the film, they are so minute that they really don't ruin the flow of the film whatsoever. So because of that, I'm giving it my super rare 10 out of 10. For horror movies, this is about as good as it gets, and it had me thinking about it for weeks afterward. The minute it came out on digital, I rewatched it because the film just stuck with me that much. But with all that being said, make sure if you haven't already to like and subscribe to the channel for anything horror related. I try to look at every comment that I've received, so make sure to give me your thoughts. And finally, thanks for watching, and I'll see you all soon.